What's up, gentlemen? This is Rising Phoenix Podcast, a podcast about how to rise up after your divorce. I'm your host, divorce coach Michael Rhodes. Let's get into it. Joining me today is Dr. Dean Sunseri. Dean, let's just jump right into it. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm a professional counselor, coach, also a pastor. So I've had a couple different hats. I do a lot of work with couples and certainly want to save whatever I can marriages when they come in, but that doesn't always happen. So on occasion, have to work with helping people patch up from the broken relationship. But my wife and I have worked together this entire time. We also wrote a book called A Roadmap to the Soul, which is sort of a paradigm that we use in helping people really resolve the emotional wounds that they're carrying and move on from, whatever difficult life events.
Yeah, and that's what we're going to dive into. But before we do that, you kind of sparked something in me. This is why I have a pen and paper nearby so I can write stuff down. In your experience, when the woman is ready to, in her words, end the marriage, how often does that's the brink? How often have you seen it? I know this is kind of anecdotal, but how often have you seen it come back when it's her decision?
The relationship to work out after that.
Yeah, like the divorce, they don't go through with a divorce, or a divorce doesn't happen. They're able to fix their marriage. The reason I ask is, in my experience, and I've been doing this kind of stuff for about 4 years now, over 4 years. When the woman decides she's done, she's done. There is no going back. But I'm just curious.
Mm.
That's my anecdotal take. I'm just curious on what your experience has been.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I usually in the first session I spend an hour and a half with a couple that's having problems. So they coming in and in some level of crisis if they're coming to see me. Um, and I usually can tell if they're going to have a chance to work it out or not. And one of the telltale signs is that if there's still a lot of anger and hurt, we have hope.
Hmm.
Uh, when you're at a state of apathy, when there's nothing there,
Uh,
that's pretty much a sign that it's over. But the percentages, it's hard to say because when both parties are committed, we can get this thing patched up. But if one's really committed and one's not, then no, it's not going to work. So it's hard to give you a direct percentage. It's probably more accurate to say I can kind of tell depending on the level of commitment when they come in.
Thanks for indulging me. It sparked something to me. I was a little curious, but when you do go through a divorce, that is clearly an emotional wound. I mean, it was for me for sure. So, um, take me through. First, let's define it. How do you define an emotional wound? What is that to you?
Well, I define it as whenever we experience difficult events, the natural response is emotional pain. So if you go through a divorce, you're going to feel all the same emotions you have as you would the death of a loved one. And so there's going to be sadness, there's going to be hurt, there's going to be anger, there's going to be guilt, perhaps shame, loneliness, depression, all the whole gamut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's natural. What am I going to do with that? I'm either going to internalize it or I'm going to externalize it. If I externalize it, I start giving it a voice. I start healing, right? I start letting go. I start going through the natural process. If I internalize it, then that's when that would become what I would say sort of a sedentary emotional wound.
Mm-hmm.
That, sometimes you say time heals all wounds. Well, there's some truth to that, but that's not necessarily the case. I remember hearing about my parents. They got married, you know, years ago. I mean, they're still married. It's probably 60, almost 60 years, over 60 years. But anyway, my dad's grandparents, my granny and my grandpa Morales, they had like nine, eight kids together, and then he took off, and he was gone for a long, long time. Wasn't even involved. And the first time him and Granny were going to see each other were at my parents' marriage, their wedding. And so all of the kids, the aunts and uncles that were there, they were like all nervous, like, what are they going to do in this time? And they were at the wedding. A lot of the attention was on them. But the thickness they described in the room when they were there at the wedding was as if they just split up yesterday, right? I mean, it just wasn't resolved, and the tension was so thick.
Yeah.
And it was interesting as I was hearing that story. I said, well, here's like 15, 20 years down the road, and still all the emotional wounding that occurred was still very much there. It wasn't resolved. Time didn't solve it. And so it was felt among the family, right?
Yeah.
So, I always use the image of like closing the door. When we have difficult experiences and we internalize our emotions about those experiences, it means we're leaving the door open. It's hard. You can't close the door when you're carrying pain about an experience.
Mm.
And when you don't properly close one door, then you can't properly open another one.
Mm.
So if I haven't closed the door in the last relationship, I get in a new one and I'm carrying all that into the new one.
Yeah.
And so, once it gets to where the relationship's not working, I say, listen, you need to do your work. You need to do your work. You need to honor the wounding that you're carrying, the pain, and you need to give voice to it. We need to get it out of your body. We need to give it voice. We need to coach it out. We need to give it relief. And secondly, we also need you to take hold of your part in the demise of the relationship. Don't take on the blame, but take on your part. What is it? We need to identify what you did to contribute to it, even if it was in retaliation to what they did. And you have to own that.
Yeah.
If you do those two things, we can fully restore you so you can properly close the door. So when it's time to open up the next door, you're not you're not carrying it all in, right?
Yeah.
You've you've become a better man from that past experience.
Yeah.
So my thing is that, look, if say the husband and wife come in, the wife falls out the process. I say, do your work. And what I promise you is if you do your work, this relationship's going to work out. And if it doesn't, God's going to send you somebody better because you've done your work. And oftentimes, as you know, as men, we're women seem to have a little easier time with doing the emotional work than we do.
Yeah, for sure.
And
Yeah.
so yet, I remember studying behind a guy years and years ago. It's probably 20 years ago, and Robert Bly, and he wrote a lot of stuff about the men's movement. But he said one time I was listening to him give a talk, and he said lots of us men get stunted in what he called emotional adolescence.
Hmm.
That we might be in our bodies, we might be 30, 40 years old, but we still feel like emotionally like we're adolescents. We want to hang out with the guys. We don't want to be committed. We're not. And he said what he's noticed is that sort of the rite of passage into emotional manhood is by embracing your grief. I was like, wow, that's pretty wild. What did he mean by that?
Mm.
But I really got a hold of that. It's like when you learn to manage and embrace whatever grief you have about life, and you really learn to manage that and work through that, then you actually move from emotional adolescence to emotional adulthood, and you actually really start desiring all the things of manhood, of being the protector, being a provider, being committed, raising up kids, connecting and bonding with children and teaching them, standing up. And it just starts to happen automatically. And his theory was that that automatically happens when you learn to manage emotionally well, or in this case, dealing with the emotional wounds, because they don't go away.
No, they
So
don't.
we go from internalization to externalization. We get love through it. And all of a sudden, we start healing from that very experience.
So are we talking about just basically just talking about it, or are there certain other things, steps? Because as we were talking before we got started, I'm an ex-military guy. I like steps. Like I like um, rigidness in some ways. Like what do I have to do? You tell me I got to do it, I'm going to do it, or at least
Yeah.
I mean. I'm gonna give it the old military try anyhow. So is it just getting with a great therapist? And I think that's a whole other discussion. But a great therapist and talking about it and externalizing it in that way, or are there other things that need to come with that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's a combination of education and doing the work, right? So so the first thing I would do if I had a man that came to me and was the relationship just broke up, they're devastated at trying to put their life back together. First thing I would do would be to just educate them about the grief process.
Mm,
What is the healing, what is the emotional grief process that you will naturally go through because you've experienced this deep wound in your heart? I say, physically we have a whole system in our body that heals. If I get cut on my arm and I start bleeding, my body's going to start doing things to heal that wound. It'll start sending white blood cells, it'll start scabbing. My job is I need to take care of the wound. I
mm,
need to clean it. I can't continue to work in the garden while I'm bleeding. No, it's going to get infected. I have to care for it, right?
yeah.
If I care for it, what my body will do naturally and me caring will cause that wound to heal. It's the same thing that happens emotionally. It's we've been designed to heal from emotional wounds. And there's the process, it's often called the grief process. I like to call it the healing process that a person will go through different stages. So I'll educate them on the different stages of grief, the denial, the anger, the bargaining, the pain, the hurt stage, the acceptance.
Mm,
And then I would also teach them the emotions that go with each stage, right? And so we talk about that, and then I also talk about what is emotions.
mm,
Emotions are just a part of being human. It's it's a part of natural response to different events and how to manage them. Well, you have to identify them, and then you have to be able to verbalize them in a safe place. You have to be able to, and then you begin releasing them, and then they'll start healing, and it takes time. So depending on how big the loss is, will be how long it'll take to work through this process of healing, and that one day it's a very sort of it's not a neat process, right? You kind of move through the stages, but then ultimately you move towards acceptance, and then your heart starts to heal. You start to feel ready to kind of get back into the game. But so however you don't need a therapist to do that. You can use a therapist, but you need someone that's a friend that loves you, that was willing to help be with you, to help you talk it out, also advocate uh, writing, journaling,
mm,
uh, getting some type of externalization. If I see you have your guitar, write music, art, anything to externalize. The problem occurs when it gets internalized. The relief comes by externalizing.
mm,
And that's just a real major part of the process. Now, I also teach, given the fact that, my background is both theology and psychology,
mm,
but there's two fundamental principles, spiritual principles, that have tremendous psychological impact. And I say, we can heal anything in a couple, or we can heal any hurt that you've had if you practice two principles. And they were both two principles that Jesus taught. But one of them was repentance. But most often people think of repentance as I'm repenting before God for something I did out of line, right? But there's a horizontal dimension is repentance is to have a heartfelt sorrow for the things that I have done that have hurt you, taking full responsibility for that, verbalizing that, and making a commitment to change. And so I often say with couples, I said, look, you hurt me, that's one. I hurt you, that's two. You hurt me, that's three. I hurt you, that's four. You get up to 280, it's like,
right,
yeah, but if you didn't do 40, I wouldn't have did 65. It's
right,
like,
right.
how do you get out of that loop? But I say, even even if say figuratively, like if my wife symbolically slaps me 3 times, I slap her once, she slaps me 3 more times. In my own mind, she's got six in, I
Right,
got one, and she's owed at least two or three, right?
right.
But repentance is to say, honey, it was wrong for me to slap you,
Mm.
and I'm sorry, and I'm going to learn to do it differently. I'm going
Yeah,
to work on this. It's her job to work on her part.
sure.
But so that's the first principle is repentance, and that's part of taking responsibility for my part, right?
Yeah.
The second is forgiveness. Now, people misunderstand when I say forgive. Well, I'm just supposed to let people run over. No, 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 no.
Right.
No. People don't understand that forgiveness is for themselves.
Yeah.
If if you and I are friends and you slap me and you go about your business and the next day I think, man, I can't believe Michael slapped me. I think about it one time. And the next day I think about it, man, he hurt my jaw. I'm going to get him next time. I think about it one time. And the next 30 days I think about it one time a day. After 30 days, how many times have you slapped me? 31, right?
Wow.
The original slap, and I recycled through it over and over and over. And I'm mad as a hornet.
Right.
Now, is it okay for you to slap me? No, no, it's not. But if I get that offense out of my heart on the third day, then I'm dealing with 4 slaps instead of 31.
How do you do that? Because yeah, and by the way, sometimes if I'm not talking a lot. I'm really sort of taking all that you're saying and trying to sort of process it as I do, as I hear you, and it's making me think a lot. And so this one really hits me. So someone wrongs you.
Yeah.
How do you not do that? Because I think I'm asking selfishly. I do the shit out of that. Like I will think about it until I find the answer, and or I just get so exhausted, just let it go or whatever eventually. But like, how do you stop yourself from ruminating on being wronged? How do you do that?
Yeah, it's a golden question, but really there's the offense and there's the my emotional response to the offense, right?
Yeah,
It's usually hurt, anger,
sure.
fear, whatever. All
Yeah,
right. So forgiveness is just not an intellectual assent to say I forgive you.
right.
It's an emotional process where basically you recognize the truth of what's in your heart, the hurt, the anger, and I'm willing to lay it down on the altar and ask it to be removed. Now, I think at that point, it moves into the realm of spirituality because I don't think we can just, I think we need assistance. We need grace for it to be removed, right? And so there's something to just the willingness to lay it down and then to trust that it'll be removed or spiritually if you have a relationship with God to ask him to do that. And what happens is that then I become free,
Mhm.
right? But how do you do that? It's a good question. I mean, it has to become an intention first.
Yeah.
There has to be a willingness, an identification of what I'm carrying, and then a willingness to let it go. You know, the interesting thing is the word forgiveness originally has its roots in the ancient Israel. It was the sin of the people, right? They there was the offense of the people, and once a year they would lay hands. The high priest would lay hands on the goat. It was called the scapegoat, and, and
Huh.
the scapegoat would carry the sins of the entire nation and go out into the wilderness and die.
Huh.
And it's kind of an interesting image because it was like recognizing that we're in a broken condition and we hurt each other. We get hurt by our families, our communities, all. I mean, it's just part of being human. But the sin of all that, okay, once a year they would lay it on the goat and the goat would take it out. So there's almost this notion of an offering of it up, right? And having it removed from my heart because the issue has to do with your heart. Uh, when when I offend someone and I don't own it, it begins to make my heart hard.
Mm.
When I'm offended by someone and I don't release it, my heart becomes hard. It's hard to have a successful relationship with a hard heart.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm assuming success in any kind of endeavor, right? If you're, because I think this happens a lot with men when they go through something like this, they get mad at the world. I mean, I did that in general. When my father died, I was 22. I was angry at the world. I
Yeah.
lean on anger so very much. Um, I want to go back to sort of what forgiveness provides, because here's what I think and I love everything you're saying. I agree. I think um what happens when you don't forgive, and I say this all the time, but I'm not, I haven't gotten anywhere close to perfecting this or getting it even right, maybe. But if someone does something to offend me or hurts me or whatever, and I become very, very angry, and then that affects my whole entire life, right? It
Yeah.
affects all of my interactions. I'm cranky, um, and I take it out on other people in small or maybe big ways. And so that means, therefore, I'm not in control. It's that person, their actions have controlled me in such a way that they have completely altered my life and made me behave in a way that I normally wouldn't. And so what I think, what I try to do is be mindful of that and say, I don't want to be this way, because if I am, not only did this person hurt me initially, but now they're
Right.
controlling my life. But
Right.
but boy, is that hard to do. Um, how much this is I am not a religious man. I'm not against it. My best friend is very religious. I have nothing against it. To each his own.
Right.
But how much of this sort of stuff, because you kind of alluded to it, does is there an how necessary is the element of some kind of spirituality where you can sort of call to a higher power, or lean on, or have faith in, or give your burden to? Like, how much do you think that is a, a part of this process, the forgiveness process?
Yeah, I would say that my experience has been, because I work with people of all different levels of belief, from agnostic, atheist, believer, it doesn't matter to me.
Sure.
Uh, but what I do notice is that individuals that have an authentic faith, not one that's just been passed down that's kind of empty, but
Right,
authentic
right.
faith, they actually move through the process faster. So it gets accelerated.
Why?
Now,
Why is that?
well, I think that there's a what I would call a grace element to it. A grace is when something is done for us that we can't just muster up and do for ourselves. And so I think when that happens, it occurs. But I do think humanly, we are made naturally to heal. It's almost like the healing process can be accelerated if that element is there, or often does, right? And so in some sense, yeah. The other thing about forgiveness is that it needs to be sometimes just an honor and externalize it. I move a long way. I'll give you an example. When I was a late teenager, my dad's drinking escalated to where it got out of control and ruining my parents' marriage and so forth. My early 20s, my dad made the courageous decision to go to treatment, and he's been sober ever since. All right. So, which thank God, that was awesome. All right. About 4 years into his sobriety, he was wanting to repair his relationship with me,
Hmm.
which, you know, I loved it and I hated it at the same time, because I was still pissed with some of the stuff, right?
Sure.
Some of the stuff that happened in my teenage years. Yet there's a part of me that wanted to just sit on his lap and have him hold me. You know what I mean? It's like so. So I had this divided parts, but he would make overtures like invite me to go to breakfast and do certain things, and he's been sober for a number of years, and I'm still red as a hornet. I mean, I'm just angry, right?
Sure.
And I'm rejecting some of this. Well, one of my friends says to me, he says, dude, you need to deal with that. I said, what do you mean I need to deal with that? I said all these things he did, blah, 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 blah. I'm just going through the list.
Sure.
He said, you say you want to be close to him. And he said, it's you pushing him away. And that convicted me, because he was more available to me than in a long, long time. And yet, because of my anger, or you could say because of my unforgiveness, I was pushing him away. Right. So I said, well, what do I have to do? He said, you write a letter and tell him about what you were hurt about. And what are the things that you're still carrying? And what are you still resentful about? And how it impacted you. And then he said, at the end of the letter, you write that you forgive him and that you're going to let it go. and asking God to help you forgive him. So I'm like, I'm somewhat resistant, but I'm in my 20s. I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And I said, but I'm not sending it to him. He said, you don't have to send it to him. You read it to me, and I had two other guys I was in this men's group with. He said, you read it to us. So, man, I wrote this letter out, dear Dad, and I was just writing, when this happened or when I was embarrassed when you did, just the things that came to mind, and that this was really hurtful for me, and blah blah blah, and then I forgive you, I forgive you, and I'm thankful for you going to treatment and getting better. So it comes to me, I get to the group, and I start reading this letter. And I mean, I was so surprised at how much came up for me.
Mm.
I mean, I was crying like a baby. I'm snotting. it was just, I was really surprised at how much I was carrying, right? That I wasn't even aware I was carrying. Now, previous to writing that letter, I would go to my parents' house. My dad would walk by, we're Italian, so he's pretty affectionate. And we'll hug and kiss and stuff. And whenever he'd hug me, my body would freeze up. It would like stiffen up. Now, I didn't want it to stiffen up, but it just did.
Yeah.
Now I was carrying all this energy in my body. I wasn't really aware of it, but my body would stiffen up. So I read this letter to my friends. I'm crying. I'm embarrassed, but they just loving me through it. They listen. I declare that I forgive him. I'm letting it go. I can remember as if it was yesterday, and it was probably 25, 30 years ago. I was sitting at my parents' house, went to go visit. I was sitting on the sofa. My dad walked by and touched me on the shoulder. And it's the first time I didn't flinch.
Mm.
I received his touch. And what blew me away was the fact that that touch that he gave me that day had been available for 4 years, but it was I who was rejecting it because I didn't forgive. And then at that moment, I received it. Now, he would never remember it,
Right.
right?
Right.
But I did. And that's the power of forgiveness, you see, because when I don't, I'm carrying this stuff and the love that is around me from the person that I haven't forgiven and those around me that love me, it keeps me from receiving it. So not only was I probably rejecting it from him, but to some extent, the men that I was in the men's group with, I was rejecting, and perhaps my wife,
Mm.
and perhaps, but because of the letting go of that, and how did I let it go? I just honored it. I just wrote the truth. I was with people that cared about me and loved me,
Mm.
that validated it, that and the energy that I was carrying in my body that I wasn't even aware of, I released. And it was like a cathartic experience because it's an issue of the heart. It's like I would say my heart went from being hardened to a little bit more softened.
Mm.
And it's interesting when I tell couples, I say, you need to learn to practice repentance and forgiveness. Because, like what Jesus taught was that you practice repentance, and he said, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. So basically, he says, heaven's around you. And when you practice these two principles, it ushers heaven into a situation.
Mm.
But the opposite is true too. I said, you want hell in your relationship? Never apologize and never forgive.
Right.
And I promise you, you'll have lots of hell in the relationship. It ushers in the other team. And so in some sense,
Mm.
it's a real big deal in terms of if I get divorced, how do I recover? It has nothing to do with the partner and the hurts. It has everything to do with managing your heart so it goes from a hardened perspective to starting to be softened again
Mm.
so that I can receive and give love again.
Yeah, it's so tricky. Because I think we hold so much, I know I do. I hold so much pain and fear, right? Because it's like when you grow up in a way that your feelings are not only they're not validated for sure. They're not no one gave a shit, right? In a lot of ways. So to then connect to being and releasing emotion is it's like asking fucking short dude to dunk the basketball. Like he can probably do it, but it's going to take a lot of work and maybe a ladder or whatever, right? It's like good luck. And that's the way this kind of feels to me. Is it's so difficult to connect and release that stuff because it's so much. It feels so much easier to hold on to it. It feels safer to hold on to
Feels
it.
so. It does, but it's more natural to release in the sense that I believe that it's more unnatural to hold on to it, and it's more natural to release. That we're actually made that way.
Hmm.
We don't actually always function the way we're made, but we're actually made as emotional beings.
I believe that. Yeah.
And we experience that. If we haven't been taught or learned or coached or helped to connect and release, it doesn't mean then I have to find another way to sedate that,
Yeah.
right? I'm going to learn to manage it in a healthy way, or I'll find a way to sedate and dissociate in an unhealthy way. And that's where I get set up for addictions and all kinds of unhealthy habits that end up causing more pain in my life. And so that's a crux, a very important thing is that I need to learn to manage my emotional life, because if it manages me, then it's going to be acted out in ways that are going to cause greater suffering for me and the people closest to me.
Do you think that you would have achieved your forgiveness without that group of men around you?
I think I would have achieved bits and pieces. Um, I think that, it was kind of a whole process. It's like I was real hungry to grow, right? I mean, I think we grow in one or two ways. We either proactively educationally seeking it, or we hit the what I call the cosmic banana peels. When you hit the cosmic banana peel and you fall on your butt and you have a chance to wake up and work on it, right? So that could be uh, someone close to me dies, I lose a relationship,
Mm,
I deal with some kind of something that knocks me off my feet, right?
yeah.
And at that point, I have a chance to wake up and kind of grow. So I've always been in sort of the first category that for some reason I've always been hungry to grow spiritually, emotionally, to deal with the stuff, to learn this and that. So I think that that would have helped. And I think it was because of that that I was seeking out learning to be with in a situation where I was being cared for with other men, because I went to this conference one time and it was a guy, Terry Kellogg. He was kind of a speaker, and he was sort of a psychology type guy, and I admired him, read some of his books, and he was speaking, and I was freaked out by something he said. He said, um, he said, I believe that you truly can't truly love another woman until you're first loved by other men. And I was like, loved by men. I ain't going there. I mean, it's
Right,
like,
right,
and I mean, I knew what he was talking about, but I didn't. I was like, this is kind
yeah,
of, I'm not going there.
right,
But
right.
his point was that, and he was talking more about, absentee fathers in lives and stuff. And he said, you need to be blessed and loved by other men. And if not, you're going to be searching for that through the women that you accompany, and they're not going to be able to give that to you, and it's going to cause problems. And he said, but when you have a group of men that care about you, mentors, that love you and care about you, then you can truly love the women that you're with
Mm.
in ways that you're not looking for them to meet certain needs that they can't meet. Now, I know this kind of sounds kind of sexist or whatever, but I really saw a lot of truth in that. And so when that truth hit me, I said, I need to learn to connect and learn other men who are sort of in the same process of growth and hunger. And so that's where I kind of found some of these wonderful men that are still friends to this day that just have been walking through life with. But I really believe, looking back, that it's really helped me be a better husband and a better father
Yeah, I'm sure. I think it's so much harder to find nowadays, or maybe there's just more reluctance. I'm not sure which it is. I have some really good friends for sure. But I don't see them as much as I would like. And I mean, part of that's being a single dad, half the time. I have half 50% custody. So, and then I have a job that causes me to travel, my real job, and then I have this thing and the support group that's associated with it, and all the things that I'm trying to do to help men get through this. But it seems really hard to connect with men for a lot of reasons, or at least I don't. It seems like a lot of reasons. I don't even know some of them other than it's just ingrained in us to go it alone, right? To not be vulnerable, to not ask for help, to not um, seek other men out when we're dealing with these types of things. Man up, toughen up, all those kinds of things. Do you think that it's gotten harder for men to connect, or is that just, I think sometimes when you're going through something, it's so hard to get perspective. To me, it seems like it because I struggle with it, and I've tried to um, make that a thing because I run a Facebook group and there's thousands of men there, and I try to get them to connect locally, and
Yeah.
it's damn near impossible. Do you think it's gotten harder, or am I just lacking some historical perspectives?
I think it's harder. I mean, I think there's been, in general, a breakdown of community that was easier to have years ago. I think you have to be a lot more active in creating it, like you do with the Facebook group and so forth. But, there was a time when I think there was neighborhoods, you knew your neighbors, you knew there was just a lot more intact community than there is today. It's so much more transient. So I do think that there's truth to that it's a lot more difficult. But I do think it's really, really necessary, in the sense that, you know, if healing was an intellectual trip, we'd have a lot more men that were a lot healthier.
Oh man. Oh, I'm gonna clip that one. Fucking A. Yeah. Because I feel like I could think my problems to conclusion or whatever, right? And it's not about that. I mean, I'm right. It's not
Right.
about
I mean, it's an element. It's good to have understanding, but it's really it's a relational, emotional issue. I'm not talking about emotional in a effeminate way,
right.
but I'm talking about and you probably experienced some of that in some of the good parts of military,
Mhm.
that there's just there's trust, there's connection, there's a sense of order, there's a sense of duty, there's commitment. I mean, all those things are things that really make up quality relationship, and there's sacrifice. Like military doesn't work if you're not willing to lay down your life for the person next to you.
True.
And so you have some of those elements, but how do you create that in community is um is really a question because
Mm.
even there's such a overemphasis on intellectual development and an underemphasis on emotional development.
Yeah.
And the word courage, it comes from the Latin cuore, which means heart. And it means courage means to be with heart. It doesn't mean to be with head. It means to be with heart. It also means that it means living from a heartfelt place. So my definition of mature manhood is to be powerfully vulnerable simultaneously. So what I mean by that is there sometimes we say manhood is just to be powerful, like machismo,
Yeah.
disconnected from my heart, but just duty.
Yeah.
But being disconnected from your heart in psychology terms, it's called a psychopath.
Good point.
I
Yeah.
mean, that's what a psychopath is. They're
Yeah.
disconnected from the. All right, but then there was this whole movement of uh, being vulnerable. A man needs to be vulnerable. And it's like and become a marshmallow. No, that's not right. It's not. No, it's standing in both simultaneously. To stand in your strength, in power,
Yeah.
and to still be vulnerable.
Yeah.
That's what courage is. That's what manhood is. And when you see some of these epic movies that we love, it's because the main character is that. They
Yeah.
stand in their power and they're vulnerable. So you look at something like Braveheart or Dancing with Wolves,
Right.
and you see those movies and just like you get like this is an expression of manhood. Why? Because here's a person that's strong but connected to their heart,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Just for whatever reason, Gladiator popped in my head because that's,
Gladiator,
I mean, he's a badass, right? He's fucking cutting heads off and, and whatnot, but he's doing it all because of his heart, right? If you think about it,
right?
right? He's doing it all because he has such a big heart, and I think that's it's kind of glossed over in a way. Like, I mean, it's there at face value, but I don't think as men we don't pay attention to that part of it really, right? It's just he's a badass, he's a general, he's a gladiator, um, but I think that is not encouraged. Although it's obviously there in those types of movies, but it's not encouraged. I don't think in modern day men, and it's missed by us because it's not as I don't know cut and
Even in
dry
your
maybe.
language, like it's not encouraged. That word is to be in heart, right? Encourage, in cuore.
Hmm.
It- it's imbued in our language.
Yeah.
Like even in spiritual development, if you talk about spiritual development, you I grew up Catholic, and there's many churches called the Sacred Heart of Jesus,
Hmm.
but I've never come across one that was the Sacred Head of Jesus, right?
Right.
Why? Because the center, the heart, is the place of love. It's the place of connection, vertically and horizontally. It's the place where we're supposed to live from. It's the place where courage comes from. It's supposed to be our guiding. And so, what happens is when we get injured by life and when we don't take responsibility with our behaviors, our heart becomes hardened, and then we get disconnected from all of that. Like, oftentimes, if I'm working with somebody and they show me a place where they got disconnected spiritually, I can show you a wound that was never resolved.
Hmm. Man, there's so many nuggets in this one, my friend. I thank you. And that's one of them. Just out of curiosity, for again, my own selfish the ones that the episodes I enjoy the most, the ones where they're almost like a therapy session for me. So I thank you for that.
Yeah.
If someone wanted to be more spiritual, what would you say? How would you what's the first step someone would do? I don't know when I mean someone. I don't know who I might be talking about, but
Well, I th I think that probably um, the path is so Christianity is based on three relationships: to love God, to love neighbor, and love self, right? So in some sense, there's those three relationships are the most important. Like everything else is secondary to those three things. What I believe is that anything that improves one of those relationships has impact on the other two. So I would say if you learn to have a greater love to learn how to work through your own emotional pain and own your own behaviors, and you're going through that, that's going to improve your relationship with others and your connection with God. If I do something that is seeking God spiritually and doing something to nurture that, perhaps uh, reading a sacred scripture and trying to understand that, or to learn a meditation and prayer, that's going to help your relationship with others and yourself. If I have had a turbulent relationship, say like I did with my father, and I did some work to release him, to let him go of the defensive part and improve that, that improved my relationship with myself and my relationship with God. So where do you start? Just work on one of those, right? And it'll impact the other two.
Gotcha.
And just kind of be open to the process,
Yeah.
right? So in some sense, I think that there is a whether we call it a spiritual walk or whatever, I really believe there's a true north inside of you. There's the intuitive voice, there's or your heart, or whatever you want to call it, that when we get connected to that place, it'll guide us in certain directions. It'll create a hunger for certain things. Like for example, you have your podcast, which is a wonderful service. Well, it may have come out of your own experience and your own pain, but there was something that inside of you that wanted to serve others in this.
For sure.
And you obeyed that. And as you obeyed that, it started to open up doors. So your Facebook page,
Mm.
it opened up the podcast, it opened up a community of people. It's bringing people to another level. Well, you may not call that, in a sense, directly God's work, but from my perspective, that's deeply God's work.
Mm.
Now, we may have different language to call that, but you're serving, you're giving, you're courageously following something inside of you, and it's being breathed upon, it's bearing fruit, and it's part of your destiny. So in some sense, sometimes things that you're already doing are actually very much in alignment with your purpose. I say that we all have a sort of a true north inside of us, and we may verbalize it differently. But when we start healing stuff and moving that stuff, then our true self starts to get more and more momentum. Part of the way that we work, my wife and I, is we divide you up into three parts. There's a part of you that carries your pain. There's the way you cope with your pain, which we call our protector, and there's your true self. And as you do healing work with this and you start containing this, then your true self becomes stronger and stronger. And then that's when you start walking out your purpose. But part of your purpose is connected to your pain. I always say that your greatest pain or your greatest secret or your greatest hurt is meant to become your greatest treasure. What do you mean? Yeah, it's supposed to be transformed and go through sort of the gauntlet of healing. And when you come out the other side, it's the very area that you begin to give life to others. So instead of taking life, it gets transformed into giving life. And then that's when we start walking in our purpose. Does it make sense?
Yeah, no. I mean, I felt it. I mean, it's definitely this is not easy doing this thing in a lot of ways. But I definitely compelled is a good word. Called is another word. And it's not that you're not the first person that has said you're doing God's work. I don't feel like that because I don't have a relationship with God. I don't even, I guess I'm sort of agnostic in a way. Um, I say this all the time. It's hopefully it's not doesn't sound offensive. But if Jesus knocks on my door and says, "Hey, I need some help," I would be like, "Oh, hey, yeah, I know you. I heard all about you. Sure, how can I help you? What do you need from me?" And barring that happening, and I think this speaks to my childhood, how that affects my ability to trust and be open to, I don't know, love maybe in some ways, right? Because there was the foundation was rocky, so to speak, or rough or uneven or whatever. And for me to think that there is a higher power out there that was like looking down and going, yeah, that's well, buck up, Buttercup. Like you'll be fine, right? Versus, how about maybe making sure I was, you know, my parents had the skills and all that stuff. And I know that I mean, this is a whole other discussion probably, but it's really tough for me to sort of to look out into the world or the sky or whatever and be like, yeah, there's someone out there that really cares for me and loves me, and
Mm.
that's faith, right? I don't have it. I wish I did. I envy people that do, and I think it's so hard for me again because of the foundation was so rough or whatever, and it makes it much more difficult for me to embrace
Yeah,
something out there, you know.
that makes a lot of sense, Michael. And you see, this is something else Jesus taught was in the parable of the sower. He was talking about the Pharisees. He said, though they have eyes, they don't see. So he's talking about spiritual eyes, of seeing spiritually. Though they have ears, they don't hear because their heart has grown hardened. So, which is interesting is that part of what he was saying, my interpretation was that that which keeps you from seeing or getting connected spiritually and hearing spiritually has nothing to do with your eyes and your ears. It has everything to do with the condition of your heart. And if your heart's been hardened by life, That's not a fault, it just is.
Yeah.
And it's going to keep me from seeing and hearing. Now, the other side of that is in the Beatitudes, he said, "Blessed are the pure in heart, or the soft in heart, for they shall see God."
Mm.
So, so then the question becomes, how do you go from a hardened heart to a soft heart, a pure heart? And that's the two principles we're talking about is repentance and forgiveness. And when I practice those, my heart becomes softened. So, for an example, with my dad, when I did the there was both repentance and forgiveness. I had to acknowledge that for the last 4 years, it's been me who's been rejecting him because I was angry, not him rejecting me.
Yeah.
And I had to own that and stop justifying like I'm still mad because he did this when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
So I own that and I practice forgiveness and I soften my heart towards him. So all of a sudden, how did that impact my relationship spiritually? Is that it impacted it because the part of us that carries emotional pain has no sense of time and it thinks
Yeah.
symbolically. And so, what is the symbol? Father. Now, the part of me that carries pain associated with father, with unpredictableness, distance, embarrassment, um, all these things. But then when I was able to begin to resolve that, then it also started to resolve that symbol.
Yeah.
And I always had a connection and relationship with God, but my image of him began to change, and it didn't change because of him. It changed because of the heart work that I was doing towards my father. So in some sense, it's like, you're doing all the right things. You're just on path. You're hungry. You're learning. You're applying. You're doing it. It's like that's good.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Dean, I could talk to you, I think, all day about this stuff. Thank you for the free therapy session. Um, First, before we get to the last question, how can people find you and the book and all that kind of good stuff?
Yeah. So we have a website called ihaveavoice.com. And there you can get to our YouTube channel, which we have, over 300 videos of just different stuff. We also have our book, A Roadmap to the Soul, which you can get on Amazon. And then we also, if you're really interested in doing a deep dive, we have a 4-month online coaching program called Transform You. And it's about restoring and kind of picking up the pieces. So that would be at ihaveavoice.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Dr. Dean. As you know, the last question I ask everybody is, what words of wisdom would you impart to a man who is just beginning his divorce journey?
Well, tying into our work, I would say, take some time to reflect on what was your responsibility and own that. Make amends if you can. If it would create greater harm than good, then don't make amends directly, but talk about it with a friend or find somebody you can work it out with. And number two, uh, do a resentment list. What happened, how you felt, how you reacted, the hurts in the relationship, and read that to somebody that loves you as part of your working on forgiveness. Do those two things so that you can really begin working on closing the door. So when you open up the new one, it'll be fresh.
Excellent words of wisdom, sir. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for doing this. Hopefully, we'll do it again sometime and focus on some of these other larger topics at hand. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for watching and or listening. Since my separation in July of 2019, I have done an incredible amount of work on myself. I've had many different therapists, life coaches, and went through different programs. I've taken all that I've learned and put it into my own program called Forged by Fire. If you are interested in having me help you navigate your divorce, please hit my website, risingphoenixdivorcecoach.com. I look forward to working with you.